So we talked a little bit about the demand curve and what goes into figuring out what a demand curve looks like. Demand curve is a relationship between the price and quantity for both individual consumers, but also for the entire market of consumers. And that as price falls, quantity demanded is likely to increase because of diminishing marginal benefit. How fast that increase happens depends upon um, how fast the diminishing marginal benefit decreases. If it decreases very slowly, it's likely that we're going to have a shallow demand curve, paper towels. If it decreases quite quickly, let's say like washing machines or houses or bachelor's degrees, it's going to be probably quite steep. That's a little bit of a simplification, but for our purposes, that's really good. So what we want to do now is think about, okay, so I know that at particular prices, I'm going to purchase particular quantities, or to put it another way, at particular prices, all the consumers are likely to demand a certain quantity of a product. And in this case, the product, again, we're going back to coffee. What makes the demand curve where it is? In other words, what explains why we want that much coffee? And I mean we in the plural sense, we as a community, we as a society. Why do we want that much coffee at that price? Well, economists look at 5 different characteristics of a society or characteristics of a market that goes into shaping where the demand curve not only is, but also its steepness. And we call these non-price determinants. In other words, these are things that have nothing to do with price, because remember, price only changes the quantity demanded. Price is never going to change your desire to buy it. It's just going to change how much you'll buy it. Your desire to buy it is figured by what we call the non-price determinants. In other words, this is like the DNA of demand. And we have 5 listed over here, and actually, there we go, 5. Taste and preferences of a product. Just how badly do you want it? We might really want a tablet computer for school, and we might really want an iPad because we just think it's better than an Android tablet for any number of reasons. We also might really want an iPad because, as the case at Dana Hall, we're required to have one. So in this case, an iPad's a necessity for a Dana Hall student. So in any case, taste and preferences, how badly do you want it, how badly do you need it? Something like life-saving medical procedure is clearly a necessity. You're likely to pay pretty much any price for that. I can't imagine a situation where you would forego a life-saving medical procedure because it's too expensive. So you might find that your demand for a life-saving medical procedure is like way up on the scale because give me it, I want it, I need it. Income. The wealthier we are, the higher our income, the smaller a percentage of our total income any purchase is. In other words, a car might be a huge expense if all I have is a part-time job. But if I have a full-time job and I make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, a car is not a large portion of my total income, so I might have a different attitude about that. Here's an example of what I mean. This morning I went to Starbucks, and this is a latte with a flavor shot in it. Now, I don't normally get lattes because my individual demand curve for coffee is such that I will purchase no lattes at the price given. I just don't like them enough to spend that money, but this coffee was purchased with a gift card. In other words, the gift card amounted to additional income. You probably had that circumstance in your life. It's like, well, I got a gift card, I'm just going to go get something I normally wouldn't, which is kind of the reason we give gift cards, by the way. Anyway, so as your income goes up, you're likely to buy more of a product. So demand curve is going to go up as you're going to move away from the origin as your income goes up. The price and availability of substitutes. If I went down to Starbucks to get a cup of coffee and they were selling tea for 10 cents, wow. If I'm indifferent between the two, I'm certainly going to buy tea. Even if I'm not quite indifferent, if I think that the tea is a pretty good substitute for coffee, then I'm going to switch away from that. In other words, the demand curve for coffee, I'm going to have less of a willingness at all prices to buy. The demand curve would move this way. The demand curve would end up in here somewhere. Complementary products, those are those products that go together. Coffee and sugar, cell phones and cell phone contracts. One of the reasons that phone companies often give away the cell phone, in other words, charge a price of 0 for a cell phone, is because if the cell phone is so cheap, the demand for the contract is going to go up. Right? So when you go and you buy a phone, you say, oh, we're giving away the phone now, the 2-year upgrades, all of that is an attempt to get your demand curve for the cell phone contract to move away from the origin. In other words, to increase. Cars and gas, phones and phone contracts, DVDs and DVD players, Kindles and ebooks. You can go on and think about a number of different complementary products. The number of consumers, if there's a lot of consumers, demand's going to shift to the right. The type of consumers is also going to affect where the demand curve is. Going back to coffee, if the market was full of 5-year-olds, if 95% of the people in the market were 5 years old, the demand curve for coffee is not likely to be that far away from the origin. We're not going to buy, 5-year-olds aren't going to buy much coffee at any price. At least I kind of hope not. I hope 5-year-olds aren't on coffee yet. If it's people on the 6 a.m. shift at the factory, wow, it might be way out there. I need my caffeine to get going. If it's exhausted students after having pulled an all-nighter to finish an English paper, it could be way out there. If the market is for healthcare and it's children, it's likely to be farther to the right because children need more healthcare than adults. If it's elderly, it's likely to be farther out to the right. If it's sort of 30-year-old adults who are in otherwise reasonably good health, it's going to be farther in because we're going to, again, what I mean by farther in and farther to the right means that if we are, say, taking a look at tastes and preferences, we see that if we find, let me think of a scenario here, that we find that caffeine is reported to be very good for your health. Well, we're probably going to find that people are going to want to buy more coffee at each and every price. So at the P1, they're actually going to buy, I should say Q2. Or at this price, they're going to buy more. And every price that you could look at every single price, the market's going to want to buy more. We call that a demand shift curve, demand shift to the right. What if we find that coffee is really bad for you? Oh my God, caffeine is linked to all kinds of health problems. We're going to buy less at each and every price. So you go up and down and look at all the different prices. We're just simply going to buy less. We're simply going to buy less. Let me change colors because there's a lot going on in there. So at this, like for example, at this price, if we think coffee's bad for us, we're only going to buy that much. If we think coffee's really good for us, we're going to buy this much. So the demand curve shift. Demand curves will shift because of changes in these non-price determinants of demand. As the demand curve shifts, that indicates a willingness to buy different quantities at each and every price. Now, this is very different than a change in quantity demanded. Change in quantity demanded just means as the price changes, how much does the quantity change? So if we're looking at a situation where it's just the price changing, then we just stick with one demand curve and move up and down. If we're looking at a situation where the underlying determinants of demand change, then the demand curve is going to shift. And the reason for that is because these determinants will explain our willingness to buy at all prices, not at just one price, but at all prices. That's why we have to move the whole curve, because we have to think about all the prices. So as these change, the demand curve changes. As price changes, we just move along the demand curve.